Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here in our next session really quickly. So feel free to take your seats. I have to admit, it's been a long time since I've given a presentation, so I might be a little rusty. All right, so my name is Andy Hagedorn. I know we have some new folks in the room. I'm an institutional review specialist with the department. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and my financial aid career started in 1995. So I've been in your shoes, so I know some of you are, well, how many of you ever had a little feeling of being overwhelmed, right? Okay. So I understand. We'll work through this together. One suggestion I would have, because I know some of you are experts in this room as well, is to help each other. So feel free to contact colleagues, make sure they have the correct information, right? But you've got a whole group of people, there's 150 folks here. Work with each other. So those of you that are new, partner up with somebody that may have been around for a few years. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can get your policies and procedures, and other folks can help you. So feel free to network in that regard, okay? Because I know some of you are alone, you've maybe never done this before, and you're scared. I know what that feels like. So you have to create policies and procedures manuals and learn all this stuff. Mr. Stein reminded me that on page 75 here we have the list of acronyms. We're very fond of those. So as you may have noticed, we have a bunch of them. In about 10 to 15 years, you'll have them all memorized. So it's not a problem. But feel free to ask questions if we buzz through some of these where you may not understand some of the terminology or some of the acronyms that we use here. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about student eligibility requirements. We'll go through the satisfactory academic progress policy, which will go through the qualitative and quantitative portions. We'll talk about financial aid warning and probation and an appeal if you follow through to that thing. The return to Title IV funds, Carla's going to handle that piece, so I'll turn that over to her once I get through with my presentation. So, the student eligibility information I pulled basically out of the FSA. So the FSA is the free application for federal student aid. This is the document that students fill out to initially apply for student loans when they go to attend your institution. They'll list your school code. And so there are several things that they have to meet in order to be eligible to apply for financial aid. So one of them is to become a citizen or an eligible non-citizen of the United States, right? So one of the things you'll see is that all of these things match against databases, okay? So the student aid report or the institutional student information record, we call it a SAR or an ICER, will tell you what information may have flagged in this process. So, so it's the same for the social security numbers. I used to work in the city of San Francisco, and I had a student that told me he went and bought his social security number. So it does happen. Anybody can create one. So that's why they have to be careful, and they go and they'll match this and they could flag, okay, meaning that there is a problem. So a student also has to have a high school diploma or a GED, we call it, the General Education Development Certificate. They have to be enrolled at least half-time in an eligible program, and they have to be a regular student seeking a degree or a certificate, okay. And then for drug convictions, basically if a student completes the FAFSA, they'll be asked whether they have a drug conviction for an offense that occurred while they were receiving federal student aid. Okay, so that's the stickler, the specific point, while they were receiving federal student aid. And that's changed over the years. It didn't used to be that way. If they answer yes, then they have to fill out a worksheet that will help them determine whether the conviction affects their eligibility for aid. And so probably it's going to be rare that you ever see this. I don't know, has anybody had this in their situation? Yeah. I would think more domestic schools would have this scenario. I've only seen it once in my career, so probably will not find that to be a common issue. Your students have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, right? This is what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. They can't owe a refund on a federal student grant or be in default of a federal student loan. And they have to have what we call a valid ICE or a SAR. That's the student aid report on file with your institution. So if you ever hear the term blank EFC, that means that there's a problem on the student aid report. The student didn't fill out something correctly, and there should be messages as to what's wrong. Also for foreign schools, verification is not required. This is something that we use in the domestic schools where we match the student, and if they're a dependent student, we match their parents' tax returns, their tax information to what they put on the FAFSA. But you have to resolve conflicting information before you pay aid. So you're lucky we don't have to deal with the verification piece. It takes extra time. But conflicting information does have to be resolved before you pay on the student aid report or the ICER. And then also selective service. So if you're a male between the ages of 18 and 26, you need to register for selective service. That's what we consider as the draft in the US. And so it only applies to males only. Excuse me, only applies to males. And there is another database. You can go and check this at sss.gov. All right, this is where the database matches. You can go and punch in the student's date of birth and maybe the social security number. I don't remember what it is, but it'll tell you whether they're registered or not. If they're not registered, then there's a process to go through. I don't want to go into all the details, but there are ways to verify whether a student is actually registered. So they usually do it when they turn 18. There are reasons why that may not happen. Maybe the student was incarcerated or something odd like that. But it's widely known and information is out there. So students' failure to register is basically they're not eligible for financial aid. So satisfactory academic progress. So in order to be eligible for federal student aid, they must be making SAP, what we call satisfactory academic progress. Just to be clear, there is, as we mentioned before, there's an institutional SAP policy. This is your college or university's policy where maybe dealing with grades, units, these sort of things, completion rates. And then there is the financial aid SAP. So it's important that you understand you have two policies. When we review schools, this is an area we often find that's deficient because it's confusing. Okay. So we'll ask you for this information, but don't feel bad if it's confusing because it takes a while to sort of sort this out, and I hope today we can get a little bit clearer process for you. So the department considers a SAP policy to be reasonable if it meets both the qualitative and quantitative criteria, and we'll go through some of that information here in a minute. Your SAP policy must be at least as strict as the SAP policy for students enrolled in the same program academically, okay, and and the same for students who are not receiving FSA funds, okay. So you can't have one that may favor a different student, okay? And it also has to apply to students within all categories. So if they're full-time, part-time, undergraduate, or graduate, okay, they have to all be the same for each category. You can also have different SAP policies that apply to different academic programs. So SAP also has to be monitored annually at the end of every payment period or at a minimum annually, because we'll go through that in a minute. Your policy has to require an academic progress evaluation if your program lasts 1 year or less, okay? So you have to make at least one evaluation for that. And students have to be notified if their SAP evaluation may negatively impact them. So it can't be kept a secret, right? Got to let them know. I think the easiest way to do that is to notify your students through a letter, and that can come from your office. Like I say, sometimes the academic deans will send letters out for your institutional academic progress policy. This letter may come from your office. So we have qualitative components and quantitative components. The qualitative component is usually what we consider a GPA. So this is the grade point average. In the U.S., it's very common to have a minimum of a 2.0 GPA. I know it could be different for your institution, so realize that you'll need to have to adjust your policies because they have to be as stringent, okay? For an undergraduate program that's measured in credit hours, the payment period, or the period can be no longer than 150% of the published length of the program, okay? And so it also has to state these benchmarks. This policy hopefully will be printed on a website so students can see it, because eventually somebody's going to ask about it. And so you wonder, why do we make you go through all this trouble putting these policies together? It's because at some point a student's going to challenge you on it. Has anybody had that happen yet? It might happen. So, yeah. So be prepared. Students will challenge you on these. So for graduate students, just be aware that the school defines the period for the length of the program on their SAP, okay? So it doesn't necessarily have to be 150%. And then SULA may be a term that you're not necessarily familiar with. This stands for the Subsidized Usage Limit Applies, okay? It's a flag in NSLDS, which is the National Student Loan Data System. Okay, it indicates whether the student is subject to the 150% direct subsidized loan limitation. Okay, if the flag is set to yes in NSLDS, the student's a new borrower and is subject to the SULA. There's more information on that, but I just want to give you the highlights. Okay. So the quantitative piece goes into the pace that a student has to progress through a program. And this can be graduated, or it can be a certain number of credits each year. But basically you calculate it by dividing the cumulative hours attempted by the cumulative hours completed, and you exclude remedial courses. Does everybody understand what a remedial course is? This is usually like a prerequisite, like a pre-algebra course, for example. May not need it for the degree. So you have to have an established procedure for reviewing and addressing this additional information that may have an impact on SAP reviews. So if you review SAP at the end of the spring term and receive late notification of a grade change from the previous fall or spring, then you have to recheck SAP using that new information. Okay. So your policy has to state how qualitative and quantitative information is impacted by incompletes, withdrawals, repetitions, transfer credits, and credits that are accepted from another institution toward the student's program. Those have to be counted as attempted and completed hours. So altogether, you'll see that there's multiple factors that will go into your policy. Most of these you're going to have an academic policy as well, so you will see how they match up, okay? You probably will use a lot of your institutional policy to meet the same type of standards. I created this great little flow chart to give you kind of an idea. I think a lot of folks get confused on the SAP warning and the probation process. And so I just want to, I'll kind of go back to this a little bit here in a minute, but we'll first talk a little bit about SAP warning, okay? So this is a status that a school assigns to a student who's failing to make SAP, all right? And this will be after they have dropped below for the first time, okay? The school reinstates their eligibility for aid for one payment period, and they can do that without the student's appeal, all right? So this is an automatic. Their status may only be used by schools that check SAP at the end of each payment period, and only for students who are making SAP in the prior payment period for which they were enrolled. Does that make sense? Okay. So you don't have to use SAP in probation, all right? This is an optional thing. And it wouldn't be used for programs that are 1 year or less, right? So you got to have enough time to do these. But warning is allowed only if SAP is measured in each payment period, right? So if you measure it annually, you can't do it. Yeah, so the question is do we have to give the warning in writing? And so the answer is yes. And so it goes back to what I spoke about here a couple of slides ago about students must be notified of the SAP evaluation that adversely impacts their aid eligibility. So I would recommend that you have form letters set up, and you can set them up for warning and for probation, which we'll go through in a minute, and also regarding the appeal process. So again, financial aid probation, this is an optional piece. It's a status that the school assigns to a student who's failing to make their satisfactory academic progress, okay? But it's also in a condition where a student appeals and the appeal is successful, all right? So as we go back to the diagram, the student's grades drop below the minimum, and then the financial aid warning kicks in for one term. Then the student has the right, if they, again, do not make satisfactory academic progress at the end of the warning period, all right, then they lose their eligibility, okay? And the only way to regain that eligibility is to file an appeal. And if the appeal is granted, then the student will go on probation for one term. We'll talk about this here, okay? So the student's appeal has to state why he or she failed to make SAP. You'll get common answers. Usually it could be the death of a parent or a relative. There could be, traveling overseas. There could be a lot of things from homesickness to, physical illness, all sorts of different things. And so the question will be what's changed, what will allow the student to make SAP in the future. So you have to make sure that they complete all of this information. So some schools will have a form letter where they'll ask these questions specifically, or at least should guide the student a little bit so they understand what they're writing about, because sometimes they're not clear what they're appealing. And so then the institution has to make a determination if the student's going to be able to make SAP by the end of the next payment period. Okay, so you'll have to look at the grades and see where they're at, see if it's reasonable for that student to make the minimum requirement. If it's a C grade average or a 2.0, it'll be different for you in some cases. You have to then determine whether that is really feasible or not. If it's not feasible, then you have another option. Okay, the student can be placed on an academic plan, and so that plan can actually go longer than one term. Okay, so you can determine what it will take. If it may take 2 or 3 terms for, let's just say 2 terms for the student to reasonably regain their SAP, then that's where you would put your academic plan into place. So of course the plan can be simple or detailed. So the student has to make the appeal first. It has to be approved. So it has to be the first term under the plan, again, is going to be the probation piece, but it can be for multiple terms. Again, be careful too, don't go too long, right? So you can't just say, well, here, I'll just get this till you finish your program, all right? So you have to be reasonable about your plan. I would say most students, if they're not going to be making SAP within, a couple of semesters or terms, they're probably not going to be successful in your program. And you also need to watch too, because they may be, your academic program policy may boot them out before they finish, right? So you need to make sure these are all in the same plan. So there's no reason to do an academic appeal and put them on a plan if the institution's going to remove them from school for not making academic progress, right? So you need to coordinate, understand what's going on from the academic side a little bit, okay? So you don't have to have an appeal process, and if you choose to do that, that's fine, but the student just has to know how they regain their eligibility, all right? So, like I said, the SAP warning and probation is not required, but they do have to know how to regain eligibility. Question? Can somebody grab her a microphone? Here, we'll get you a microphone. Yeah, that should be.
Is it on? Yeah.
There we go.
So in terms of terminology, just wanted to clarify one thing. So you're saying plan may be for multiple terms.
Yes.
Does this mean multiple payment periods of financial aid?
Yes, the same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so payment period, multiple terms, same terminology. Can we grab you a microphone or put you up there? We're recording this, so that's why I'm asking for that.
In the thing you said that we provide the student with a warning, like one period, and then the probation. Yep. So there's a period of warning, then there's probation, and then there's suspension. Is
Right.
it so? So student has 3.
Yeah, if you do that, so they can have more than 3. So warning, and then the appeal, right, has to happen.
Yep.
Okay, so they cannot go into probation without an appeal.
Yep.
Right, so once the appeal is approved, then you go on probation. If you choose not to do an academic plan, or the student doesn't make SAP at the end of the academic plan, then they lose eligibility until they regain SAP, which is academic
How
progress.
does it impact if we actually, because the SAP, every semester, we send, at the beginning of every award year, we provide the student with all this information in terms of what the prerequisites are, and SAP is very clearly highlighted that they need to meet this. So if in case the student fails to meet it, based on what our SAP policy is on the published SAP policy, that we put the student on probation, and they have the right to appeal
Well, you put
and
them on,
explain.
they have to appeal before probation.
We issue the probation letter. So that's why I'm trying to clarify, because then I'll go back and rectify that. Because this says you give a warning and let them appeal, and if they don't, if the appeal's not successful, then you put. So that's a revision that is.
Yeah, this is a common area of confusion. This is why I made this little drawing to hopefully explain it, or at least you have something to refer back to, because it's a very common error. It's easy to get confused by. So the student is making academic progress, then all of a sudden they're not.
Yep.
If you have the warning process in place, the next step will be warning automatically. Okay, they don't have to do anything. At the end of the warning period, if they don't make SAP, then they have lost eligibility, basically. Okay, and the only way to regain it is to appeal. Okay, if they appeal and the appeal is denied, they don't get eligibility until they make SAP. If the appeal is approved, then the student will go on probation or the academic plan, either one, whatever you choose. Okay, and at that point, probation would go 1 term, and if the student didn't make eligibility after that, they lose eligibility. If they make eligibility after that, then they go back to the standard process, right? But warning can only happen 1 time.
Yep.
So the next time, if they go under, they'd be on probation automatically.
But they're eligible to receive funding while they're on probation.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
when we
you're-
say the
you're
word
allowing-
suspension, that basically means they're not eligible until they meet that minimum standard.
Okay. So you're actually allowing the student to receive funding. So warnings for the period when they haven't been able to meet, and
The
they
first
appeal
period.
it to explain why they haven't been able to meet.
Mm-hmm.
Then if they're not able to justify that, we put them on probation and they still receive the funding for that period.
Right, they have to
And
appeal.
then 2 consecutive periods of not meeting the SAP requirements.
Yes, it's yeah. After the first period that they drop below, they go on warning automatically. If they don't make SAP, they're out. Okay, unless they appeal. And they appeal. If it's approved, then they go on the probation, which is say for a term, and then hopefully they'll continue on. So there's all these measures. At the end of warning, you lose eligibility unless you appeal. If the appeal is denied, you still lose eligibility. You have to wait till the student regains eligibility. If the appeal is approved, unfortunately, this works really well in a flow chart, but it's really complicated. It's hard to put on a page, so I tried to really make it as simple as possible. This diagram doesn't quite do it exactly, right? So But I can go through that with you. This, like I said, this is a common issue we have. I wanted to try and make it simple, but the student has these different points in the process where they
To address the issue.
Yeah,
And given an
yeah.
opportunity to appeal,
Mhm.
basically. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry, we got one right behind you here.
Sorry. Could you just give an example of if the school does not have an appeal policy, what the student could possibly do to regain eligibility without an appeal policy?
Well, you're going to have to determine that as an institution. If you're not going to have the whole process of warning and probation, it may be, well, you have to maintain, you have to reach the certain grade point average in order to maintain academic progress at the institution and for financial aid.
Or you're out.
it's- Yeah. So here, for most schools in the U.S., it would be if you drop below a 2.0 grade point average, then you're not making satisfactory academic progress, right? And then it could be the same for financial aid if you don't have an appeal and warning process. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi. Are there any provisions for students with disabilities for meeting SAP?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any. Are you aware? You're not aware? Yeah, I'm not aware of any situations like that. Now, I think probably the best way to approach that is maybe the academic plan, if you choose to do warning and appeals. Because you may have students with learning disabilities, there may be language barriers, and there's multiple things that U.S. students could run into in a foreign institution. So there's no provision for that per se. But again, you don't have a lot of room to compromise because of, as strict is the language in writing your policy, or stricter than your academic policy. What I've found basically in my experience is the academic policy will almost always lead this, okay? So if the student is not making academic progress, eventually, they're probably going to be forced out of the institution right along with their financial aid. So, and what this eventually does, I've seen students that would go into engineering as a freshman, they had no business being in there. They rack up a lot of debt, they come out as at the end of their sophomore year, they flunk out and they've got, in a private school, they might have $60,000 worth of debt and no degree. So what we're trying to do is avoid that, trying to help students do, either switch majors or figure out a plan, and that may be part of the plan. It may be, I'm sorry, but your degree program is not, you're not going to be successful here. You may need to meet with an academic advisor and look at a different option. So best advice there is stay out of the academic world, though, because, the students will undoubtedly accuse you of something eventually. Let the academic folks handle that.
Andy, I'm a bit concerned that there are so many questions that we may not actually get through your entire presentation. Okay. And then we want to make sure that Carla has all the time that she needs to go through
Sure.
R2T4 because that's so important. I'm thrilled that there are so many questions because obviously the fact that you're asking questions means that you understand what you're supposed to be doing and you're asking for clarification. So if everyone's okay with this, let's keep the questions to the end. Andy can flip back to the presentation. And then don't forget that we've also got that additional session on Thursday afternoon that Jeff Baker can't come to. So if we don't get everything addressed in here, we can certainly take care of it. I think some of the questions are good for everyone to hear the answers to.
Yes.
So is everyone okay with that?
I won't
Anyone?
abandon you. I know this is a confusing one.
All right, thanks
Okay.
for accommodating that.
Yeah,
for all
and
of
so
us.
I'll quickly wrap up because I want to give Carla some time to go through her piece. The implementation questions are just things to think about. I pulled this from the domestic folks, but what kind of standards are you going to have, fixed or graduated? You're going to have a certain percentage of courses that have to be completed over the period of the degree. We have different standards for different categories of students, how you treat the course incompletes, the withdrawals, the repetitions, transfer credits, even remedial courses. Again, we mentioned, are you going to talk about allowing appeals, and if so, how many? So the student may have to go through more than one, especially if their academic plan went for a couple semesters, then they got off probation and they fell back into it. Who's going to review the appeals? Will this be an academic? Will it be a committee? Will it be you? Who will be a part of that? And if you're going to have the academic plan, who's going to develop it? Obviously, I would hope you would get a partner in your academic side, whether it's a dean or a department head or somebody like that, to help you make these decisions, because they can be challenging. This is not a financial aid question. This is more for the academic folks, okay? So here are a few resources. I'll refer back to that. Again, we didn't touch on everything, so the handbook is very good. And of course, there's electronic announcements and the FSA assessments and some policy Q&As. So right now, I'll turn it over to Carla so she can take you through the R2T4 process.
Thank you, Andy. For this portion of our session, I will walk you through and help you navigate your way in completing a return of Title IV worksheet calculation. Before we do that, I would like to go over the elements and components of an R2T4 that I believe is very important for you to know before we even start the calculation. Show of hands, how many of you have done an R2T4 calculation? Oh, a lot. Good. This should serve as a very good confirmation for you. What is an R2T4 calculation? If I could direct your attention to the slide. Calculation requires when a recipient of Title IV aid withdraws from an institution during a payment period of enrollment in which the recipient began attendance. What's the key word? Withdraw? Very good. Keyword is withdraw. For a student that began attendance, unless the student withdraw from your institution, there is no need for you to perform an R2T4. For the purpose of Title IV, a student is not considered withdrawn unless he or she ceased attendance or withdrew 100% from all his or her eligible scheduled courses for the period being payment period or period of enrollment. Your student who reduced his or her course load has not withdrawn. When he withdrew 1 or 2 or 3 from five scheduled courses for the period, he actually changed his enrollment status, but is still attending. Therefore, there is no need for you to perform an R2T4. For your student who failed to begin attendance, these are your students that you commonly call no-shows. They have not established eligibility for the funds for the payment period or period of enrollment. Therefore, if you disperse Title IV funds for these students, for the period, you need to refund it all within 30 days. If you disperse Title IV fund directly to the student or to the parent borrowers, you must contact the loan servicer. Let the loan servicer know that your student did not commence attendance. Let them know how much you've disbursed. That way they can start the collection process. What is the purpose of R2T4? It's a calculation, compares the amount of Title IV aid the recipient earned to the amount disbursed, and determine whether funds must be returned or student is eligible for post-withdrawal disbursement. Keyword, earned. The student is only entitled for what he earned at the point he withdrew at the payment period or period of enrollment. If he earned less than what you've disbursed, then you have to return the difference being the unearned portion. If he earned more than what you've disbursed, then you must offer post-withdrawal disbursement. Post-withdrawal disbursement has to meet the condition of late disbursement. You can only disburse post-withdrawal if they meet those conditions. Conditions are loans has to be originated, students should have a valid ISER, MPN has to be signed, it cannot be a second or subsequent disbursement, or the student has not withdrawn before 30 days for the first time full-time. Elements of R2T4. Withdrawal date. Withdrawal date will determine what is earned and unearned, triggered by if you are attendance taking or not. If you are attendance taking, withdrawal date will always be the last day of attendance coming from your attendance record. If you are not attendance taking, then withdrawal date can be at midpoint, 50% of the period, or last day of an academic-related activity. What you consider academic-related activity is the last day the student physically attended a course, last day he submitted a homework, or took an exam, or participated in a group activity that's related to the course. What's not considered academic-related activity is when your student who's not attending any of his classes is only participating in his meal plan, in your meal plan, or in your housing, or is just seeking academic advising. The institution needs to document this and not the student. For your student who did not return after an approved leave of absence after 180 days, withdrawal date will always be the last day of attendance for institutions that is attendance taking. For a school that is not attendance taking, it will be the day you approve that student to go on leave of absence. Date of determination, this is a very important date. This will actually trigger all your reporting requirements. This is the day that you found out the student is no longer attending in your institution. Could be notification done through official withdrawal, where the student, following your withdrawal process, let you know that they will be withdrawing. Or it could be unofficial withdrawal, where you, the school, will make a determination following your process, your policies, your attendance record, how much days is unexcused absence. For institution that is required to take attendance, you are required to make a determination within 14 days from the last day of attendance to make a determination if your student is going to continue or you should withdraw the student. For the school that is not attendance taking, you have to make a determination within 30 days. 30 days from the last day of a payment period, or 30 days from a period of enrollment, or 30 days from the last day of their academic program, whichever comes first. Additional requirements for a school that is not attendance taking, if the student at the end of a payment period receive all Fs, you need to verify if those Fs are earned, or if the student has withdrawn, that's the reason why he has Fs. So if that's the case, you need to perform an R2T4 calculation for that student. Amount disbursed are the dollar amount that you posted to the student ledger, Title IV funds you posted to the student ledger, or you disperse directly to the student. aid that could have been disbursed are the Title IV funds that you package the student. When you package the student for the payment period or the loan period, you're assuming that the student will be attending and will complete that payment period. As long as they meet the condition of late disbursement, they can be considered as aid that could have been dispersed. Payment period, period of enrollment are the academic period established by your institution. Payment period could be your semester, your trimester, your quarters, your term. Period of enrollment would be a combination of your 2 semesters, your 3 semesters, your 4 quarters. Post-withdrawal disbursement are the Title IV funds that the student earned, but you are going to disburse after they withdrew, as long as they meet the conditions of late disbursement. Unearned aid are the Title IV funds that you're going to return based on your calculation. You need to return within 45 days. Institutional charges are academic-related charges you've initially charged to the student. Only include educational costs. Determining can I bother? Sorry. Determining students' withdrawal date. I've mentioned earlier, withdrawal date could be last day of attendance from your attendance record if you are attendance taking, or could be midpoint or last day of an academic-related activity if you are not attendance taking. Withdrawal date, you should use the best date. For example, if your student withdrew and let you know that her last day would be Friday, but based on your academic record, the student took an exam Monday after Friday, you should use Monday, even though you have a documentation coming from her that she's withdrawing Friday. Once you determine the withdrawal date, now you're going to calculate the earned portion, the percentage earned. Percentage earned is total number coming from the withdrawal date, how many days the student actually was in school, divided by how many days are the days in your payment period. You minus any leave of absence, so numbers of days attended divided by numbers of days in the payment period as the denominator. You minus any leave of absence. If there is any leave of absence, you minus it from the denominator and the numerator. Also, you can minus any consecutive breaks that are 5 days or more. What you consider consecutive days that are more than 5 days or more are, for example, a student who went on a break Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is 3 days, and Saturday, Sunday you do not offer classes. That would be 5 days. So if the student previously, when you were calculating days from withdrawal date to the first day of class, has 55 hours, because there was a scheduled break of 5 days or more, it becomes 50 for you, divided by numbers of days from the payment period, which also you have to deduct the 5. Let's assume the student attended 50 days divided by 100 days. So what that means is the student earned 50%. So that 50%, you're going to move to the next tab where you will be calculating total dollar amount earned. So if the student earned 50% and what you've disbursed is $10,000, but what could have been disbursed is another $10,000, a total of $20,000, the student only earned 50%, so only $10,000 out of that 20, which you've already disbursed, so there is nothing to return. If you've only disbursed 5,000 and the student earned 10,000, then you have at 5,000 that you have to offer as a post-withdrawal to the student or to the parent borrower. With post-withdrawal, you can only disburse it if you did the notification and you got an approval from the student. Unless you receive a student, a permission, a confirmation from the borrower, do not pull any money as a post-withdrawal. Now, you ready for a calculation? Let's do a calculation for this higher education university who has a 2-year program. They measure academic progress by credit hours. Award year is 2 semesters. Period starts date is February 8th and is May 27. Withdrawal date is March 13. Scheduled break is none. Required to take attendance is yes. There are 2 forms that you can, of R2T4 that you can download from IFAP. You should download the 2010, which is the latest version. If you measure academic progress by credit hours, you should use Form 1. If you measure academic progress by clock hours, you use Form 2. So the higher education university is credit hours, so we're going to use Form 1. The student name is John Doe, social security number, the date you completed the form. This date cannot be longer than 30 days from the date of the termination. So the student withdrew on March 13, and your date of determination is March 13 as well. If you have a standard period of enrollment, sorry, hold on, wait. If you have a standard period, like you offer by semester, trimester, or quarter, you can only use payment period. But if you are offering program by clock hours or non-standard, you can use period of enrollment, or you have an option to use payment period. So if you are semester, you can only use payment period. Step 1, let's determine Title IV, the money that you've disbursed. A and C are grants information. You do not need to fill this out because you cannot pull down grants. You cannot offer grants for your student. You only have to worry about B and D. So you enter in B, Title IV funds that you've disbursed. Enter in D, Title IV funds that could have been dispersed. For this student, 10,388 has been dispersed, so the total, and there's 0 could have been dispersed. So a total disbursement and could have been dispersed is 10,388. Now let's calculate the total aid earned. Start date is the first day of your payment period, the first day of your semester. Scheduled end date is the last day of your payment period. Withdrawal date, because this school, the school is attendance taking, it's the last day of attendance. If you are not attendance taking, it can be, this withdrawal date can be 50% of your semester or academic related activity last day. So you are counting days, calendar days, to include holidays and weekends minus any leave of absence or scheduled break that are 5 days or more. So from February 8th to the date that student withdrew, there are 35 days divided by 100 days, which is the days that you've counted for the payment period, and you get 31.8. If the percentage earned is greater than 60%, then it's 100%. Because this is lesser than 60%, you have to enter 31.8. What this means is the student earned 31% Title IV funds from the whole Title IV funds that you've scheduled him for the payment period, assuming that he will complete the semester. Now, we have to calculate Title IV aid earned by the student. 31.8 multiply what you've already pulled down means 31% of 31.8% of 10,388 is equal to 3,303.38. This means the student only earned 3,308. Although you've dispersed 10,388, the student earned less, so there is no post-withdrawal disbursement. $10,388 minus what is the dollar amount that's earned is equal to $7,084.64. This is $7,084.62 is the unearned dollar amount. This is the dollar amount that needs to be returned. That now we'll figure out how much of this $7,084 will be returned by the school. It depends on how much was charges and how much was applied towards your institutional charges. So step 5, have to enter your institutional charges for the payment period. If you charge upfront tuition for the whole payment period, for the whole year, you need to prorate it to a payment period, to your semester. So you add your tuition, room, and board, a total of $17,000. 17,000 times 68.2, what's not earned charge is 11,594. Because what is unearned dollar is less than what is unearned charges from the school, you have to take the lesser amount. The department does not want you to refund more than what you've received. So O will determine what the school will return. You have to return $7,084.62 within 45 days. When you return, you need to return by the statutory order. You have to return on sub first, then subsidize, and you have to round the return to the nearest dollars. So instead of $7,084.62, you return $7,084 only. So once you return $7,084, it becomes zero, so the student doesn't have to return anything. All the return will be coming from you. The $3,303.38 that was kept by the school, it will be paid by the student in accordance to his promissory note. I did not make a copy of step 9 and 10 because it's all about grants and you do not offer grants. So I skipped it. Post-withdrawal disbursement tracking form. Earlier I mentioned before you can even disperse post-withdrawal, there is a notification. The notification that you need to send to the student or to the parent borrower, and then they have to answer back and you have to get a confirmation before you even pull that money. This is where you track the dates. Your auditors will be reviewing this tracking sheet. You need to make sure that you've documented the dates before you pull down the post-withdrawal. Title IV is at risk whenever the student is already withdrawn and you are dispersing funds after the student withdrawal. One more thing on that post-withdrawal disbursement tracking sheet. You can use this form or you can use your own form. You can create your own form as long as the dates and the documentations and confirmation are being documented. Withdrawal prior to census date. Although you have a census date where you take a snapshot of who attended at a certain date, if the student withdrew before that census date, you still need to perform an R2T4. Retroactive withdrawal is when you went back and withdrew the student. You went back and withdrew the student, even if you if you credited the student and you reduced the charges or you revise it and made it 100% free for the student, you still need to perform an R2T4 if you have a day, if you have a determination that student attended. Student complete more than 60% of the payment period. This is the only time in the calculation where you do not have to round down. If based on your calculation, the student earned 60.001, then 60.001 is over 60%. The student earned 100% at that point. If the student earned 60.00, then the student earned 60%. If the student earned 59.99, it's still 59.99. So you do not round down, which is better for the student. After 60% is 100% earned. Any institutional charge or refund policy has no impact on your Title IV calculation. Determining withdrawal date, like I said earlier, you should use the best date. Consumer disclosures, you should have a disclosures in your website, or you should let the student know your return of Title IV calculation, what will happen to their Title IV funds if they withdrew, or your return policy, or where they will withdraw. Your process, where will they go in order to withdraw? Do they fill out a form? Do they go to do they go to your registrar's office? These are the references that you can visit. You can go to the handbook, Chapter 2, Volume 5. You can also read colleague letter that's specifically for R2T4. You can actually go to your FAA Access and complete R2T4 online. Sometimes it's better, instead of using the paper R2T4 calculation, sign up and use our online calculation. It's a calculator that actually your students' data is saved in our database, so you can always pull it down whenever you need it. In case of audit, I find it better. I find it good for audit. So if I cannot find the return paperwork R2T4 in their folder, I can go to FAA Access and print it again. That should conclude my presentation. Do you have any question? No question? Yes.
So we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. This session is scheduled to end at 3:35, and then Wood's session starts at 4. I know I cut 2 people off from asking R2T4 questions. Jane was one of them, and so I'm going to make sure we get those taken care of. Hold on just a minute.
Hi, quick question for the institutional charges. Do you do it per semester or per year when you calculate it?
Because you are calculating your standard base, right?
Yeah.
Semester.
Yeah, so it's per semester, right?
So your calculation is based on payment period.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's based on payment period, well, your tuition should be on payment period as well. So if you charge for the whole period of enrollment up front, but if your student withdrew within that semester, you need to prorate that charges to semesters only.
We charge per month. So
For what?
we do it per month. So
If
we
you-
don't.
If you do per month,
we charge from November until April. So So,
Okay.
yeah.
The charges should only apply to that semester where your student withdrew.
Okay. Thank you.
So Andy, we've got two R2T4 questions where what is it? Sorry, SAP. So let's go ahead and do those because I cut those questions before. So here's the first one.
Thanks, Marcia. Andy, so the question is, once a student has been on a warning term and they don't meet their SAP standards, must the student submit an appeal before the probation term?
Yes.
Okay, so they can't just meet the SAP requirements in the following term without getting funding?
If at the end of the warning period they meet SAP, then they're good. But if they don't meet SAP, then they got to appeal.
So at the end of the warning term, they don't meet SAP, but in the following term, let's say, they do meet SAP.
Well, okay, so let's back up. I mean, this is the tree that divides all the time, the yes/no answers, right? So
Right.
if they go on warning, and at the end of warning they don't make academic progress, they lose eligibility. The only way to regain that is to do an appeal. If they choose not to do an appeal, it's over. If they do an appeal, then it's got to be approved or denied. If it's denied, they lose eligibility. If it's approved, then they get a semester or term of probation.
Now, what if the student has no grounds for appeal? What if they just didn't do okay and they?
And that's it.
So,
They lose
okay.
eligibility until their grades return to the standard.
Okay, so that was my question.
Yes,
So they can
they
be
can regain
eligible.
eligibility. They just have to
Meet SAP.
make SAP, and that may take them 1 term or 3 terms or however long. Yeah.
Okay, so a follow-up clarification. What if a student fails probation in year 1, so the first year of their studies, and in the 3rd year of their studies, they want to apply for loans again? Now, in term 1 of the 3rd year, they fail to meet SAP again. Will they be placed on financial warning again?
No, warning's only 1 time only for their entire career there.
So they'll be on probation this time?
Yes.
Okay, clarified, thanks.
See, isn't this simple? Jane?
My question has to do with pass-fail courses, the impact on the cumulative GPA.
What courses?
If a course is a pass-fail, and then, so their GPA would be the same as it was the semester before, because it's not
Pass-fail.
put into the calculation, right?
If it's
I think
fail.
if it's fail, I mean, if they're getting course credit for it, then they should be fine. But at the end of the day, that has to go into their cumulative grade point average, right?
Well, what I'm saying is that on the quantitative, of course, they're going to be attempted versus successfully passed or course. But on the qualitative, if it's a pass-fail, it doesn't impact their cumulative GPA because they're not getting a
Well,
grade.
they're getting units for it, aren't they?
They're getting what?
Units for it.
But they're not getting a A or a B or
But
a
you can
C.
fail under either one, right?
Yes, but but the 2 sections, if you have a qualitative, a student has a 2.0, and then he passes the next semester, he still has a 2.0 because
Okay.
it doesn't get calculated into it,
What's not getting calculated?
It's either or.
the grade. There is no grade, it's just a pass or a fail, it doesn't have any
Right.
value.
Okay, that's fine. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they have to meet both standards. They either have to meet the grades, they have to meet
Right.
both the grades and the number of units.
So what if a school had all pass-fails?
I've never met that school before.
Neither have I, but the question we've all been wondering is that a big loophole?
I
That is
don't know. I've never seen that before. 20
Okay.
years. Sorry. I
But
don't
what-
know. I don't know. I mean, I'd never heard of that.
Okay, so if you have a pass-fail course, it doesn't have any impact on the cumulative GPA, and the student just has the same GPA as he had the last time.
They dismiss the student.
Yeah. Again, you have to meet these minimum standards. So whatever the school sets, they're going to be a GPA, and there's going to be a number of units completed.
Okay.
Is that clear or not?
Yeah, I mean, the student would continue to make SAP until let's say he failed the course the first time, and then he took the course again and he failed it the second time. He still has his 2.0 cumulative GPA until he falls below the 67% pass time.
Yeah, at some point, something's going to catch him eventually.
Eventually.
In most cases, in that scenario, would be the units completed.
Okay.
Over attempted.
We've got about 2 minutes for another question, as long as it's not as complicated as
And we can talk
James.
individually afterwards as well, too. So.
We're
Ask
all
Carla some
friends.
questions. She's dying
Jane
to
always
answer
finds
some.
the tricky one.
Thank you. I can tell you about a school that is pass-fail only throughout the entire degree, which is the London Film School. That's all it is. You either pass or you fail. And just to make sure I get this right in this case, I don't think it really applies, because if they don't make satisfactory progress at the end anyway, they're out from an academic point of view. They don't get a further shot. They fail once, they get a second chance. From an academic point of view, they don't get a further one after that. So in theory,
right,
we're stricter, basically.
My kind of thought or philosophy on this is financial aid sort of kind of trails the academic world, right? So to me, it's not exactly fair if the financial aid is steering the academic policy. You know, it has to be as stringent, but I don't want a student to leave college because they failed academic, or they failed financial aid SAP but had good enough grades to stay in school. So, you know, typically the academic will lead the financial aid policy. Or they'll be the same thing.
Thanks.
I think we have one more up here, Mike. Raise your hand again. Or maybe we have lots more, I don't know. But we can talk individually, too. Carla needs a question. Come on, we need a tough R2T4 question for her.
You can stay there. The question's for you.
Oh, man.
It's regarding SAP. You mentioned about the warning. You said that warning is just once for the entire career. Let's imagine my student didn't meet SAP in his first year, and I gave the student the warning letter and so on, and the student meets the SAP standards or he complies. But how about next year the student does not meet the SAP standards or does not comply? What should I do then? Because you said warning is just once for the entire career.
He would go back on probation. If he loses, he drops again. Does that make sense? Yeah. So they still have a way to lose out.
So should we give the student a different letter mentioning he's in probation?
Yes.
All right.
I would have form letters for each of these. And probably if you looked online, you'll probably find some good templates. Google is a wonderful tool for all the information we talked about, but don't reinvent the wheel. There should be some letters out there for that stuff. And I would look at perhaps if you don't have a colleague or know of a school internationally that's good, there are probably, and I'm not going to make recommendations, but there are probably some schools that you could find that would have these posted that you could trust.
We do have the warning letter.
Okay. All right.
Okay, we're a couple of minutes actually over, and your next session starts at 4 o'clock. That's with Wood Mason. So please save those questions, either see us individually or hold them for that Q&A session that we will have on Thursday.
Marcia?
So, great, thank you.
Okay, never mind. We're good.